Hello, and welcome to another Cloud Podcast, a podcast designed to bring you stories from the smartest minds in IT, operations, and business, and learn how they're using cloud technology to improve business and the customer experience. All right, well, welcome to another Cloud Podcast. Today's guest, and we're excited to have him from Merrick Bank, is Ken Knapton. Ken, how's it going this morning?
Wonderful. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Doing great. Absolutely. Thanks for asking. And of course, I've got my co-pilot partner in crime, Jeff Young. Jeff, how are things cooking out there?
Everything's fine in the Midwest. Everything's good here. Looking forward to this discussion.
Very good. Well, the weather's warming up in the mountains and then the Midwest, and even out here in Southern California, it's warming up a little bit. So it'll be a good podcast. We're looking forward to learning more about what you're doing over there at Merrick Bank, Ken. And just to start us off and to let people get an idea of who you are, where you're at, what obviously you're a bank, people know what banks do, but how about you take a couple minutes and just talk about your journey and how you ended up as CIO over at Merrick Bank and got into IT.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me here today. I'm excited to spend a few minutes with you guys just talking about IT. It's one of the most interesting topics in the world, I think. Lots of things going on in the tech world. My story is probably not too different from many others. I started out as a software programmer. I remember getting my first job as a programmer, and I had the headphones on my ears. I had the lights turned off and my hands on the keyboard, and I thought, that's it. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And of course, things don't turn out the way that you expect. So I kind of worked my way up through the development kind of chain of command, and served as CTO for a couple of companies, working primarily in the high tech arena. So working in companies where what we develop is what keeps the company in business, right? We sell that to consumers and other entities. And most of the software that I worked on was going to CIOs. It was management, management software, security software, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where I cut my teeth in the IT world. Eventually ended up kind of moving from the CTO role into the CIO seat, taking on more of the operations activities. And since that transition, I've really been able to work in a lot of different industries. So I've worked in finance, I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in nonprofit. So really it's been kind of a circuitous route to Merrick Bank. But now I'm here at Merrick Bank, and we're one of the top 20 issuers of credit cards in the US. So we're on that subprime market, helping people to either rebuild or establish their credit. And it's a great place to be. It's a company with a good mission, and I'm just excited to be here, helping them move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. You get a mixed bag, right? Some IT executives we talk to have that circuitous route that you've had, right? Going from different industries, different areas. And then you have the Jeff Youngs of the world, where Haynes International for 30 years and just found a good company to work for, and he was there the whole time. And so it's interesting to see how everyone's got a little bit different way of getting there to lead an organization on the IT front. What do you see as just nowadays? There's been a lot of changes. Obviously, the pandemic's been talked about ad nauseum as far as how people have dealt with that change. Beyond the pandemic, what do you see just in general, like some big changes that you see happening, the mindset of a CIO and what they're having to look out for in the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, I think so. Speaking specifically from kind of the finance world, obviously, the big kind of elephant in the room for traditional financial institutions are the fintechs, right? There are these entities that are popping up for various reasons. Either they kind of started coming onto the scene after the financial downturn because they wanted to create better ways of getting access to money, or they're just trying to fill a gap in the traditional services. But fintech, as far as financial services, CIOs in the financial services world really need to be aware of the gap that fintechs are starting to fill. And they're either going to be disintermediated, or they're going to partner with the fintechs, because the fintechs are solving problems that we as the CIOs of these institutions should be solving. And they're real problems that, we've always done it this way. This is how it's always been. And so, there are people that are finding better ways. And so that's kind of, as I look out on the horizon, that's kind of the thing I think we need to be focused on. And again, that's speaking specifically from the financial services world, not just generally from a CIO perspective in any industry.
Ken, for our listeners, could you give a specific example of one of the tools or functions, if you will, that the fintechs have brought to bear that has made a difference here, just so people can understand better?
Yeah, so I think one of the big kind of underlying technologies that fintechs are making use of that's really making a difference is blockchain. Now, I think a lot of people tend to confuse blockchain with Bitcoin.
Right.
Just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. Blockchain is the technology on which Bitcoin was written. So they're two separate things. Right. Blockchain as a technology, I think, is highly transformational, especially in the financial services world. And to specifically answer your question, I think that I just ran across a company not long ago that is so let me step back for a second. In the mortgage world, I worked in mortgages for a little while. At Merrick, we don't do mortgages, but I worked in that world for a little bit. And just as a homeowner, people probably recognize that their mortgages get sold, right? They'll originate a loan with someone, and in fact, some originators will say, "Look, we sell 100% of our loans. All we want to do is originate. We don't want to service it." And then over the course of the lifetime of that loan, of course, it's a 30-year loan, it'll get sold to different entities. And traditionally, that's a bit of a challenge to take that, package that up, send it over to the new entity, get all the paperwork and all that. So this company has now built a technology where they are putting all of the loan information for the mortgage on the blockchain. And now it's much easier to simply transition that from one owner to another. The loan stays on the blockchain. And so that's one example of, looking for some friction, I think, right, in the industry, friction in how things are done. And this is a fintech that's solved that problem. Of course, now they've got to get adoption, and there's all the same problems with startups. Yeah. But I think that's one example, right, of a place where there was a problem. They came in, they saw it, they're solving it. And again, I think there's lots of other applications of blockchain in the financial services world that are going to be similar to that.
Yeah,
that's great.
It's interesting because you look at banking, and it's been around for a long time, centuries, if not millennium, right? As far as that goes. And so like you have this old way of doing things that's very hard to move, take them off one path and move them into another. But then you have these fintech companies that are coming out of nowhere that like their whole job is to disrupt industries, right? Find those friction spots and say, can we create a better way, a better process? You mentioned before when we had a conversation before this podcast about, you had this course at Harvard that you took. Talk a little bit about what you learned from that and how you're able to apply that to what you're doing over at Merrick. Yeah,
so there's, I want to touch first on the comment you made. The banking industry is a very old industry, right? It's been around for a long time. And so here are the challenges. As these fintechs pop up to solve a problem, there's two main challenges that I see that really cause, and I hate to use the same term again, but because friction between kind of the fintechs and the traditional banking world, and that is the regulatory environment and security, right? So one of the reasons why banking in tech hasn't really changed very quickly, because banks are not, trying to adopt technology very quickly, is because of security, right? We have to be extremely cautious about securing that information that all the financial data that we are responsible for. And then, of course, there's the regulatory environment. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to dive into this course, was to find out, first of all, what's happening with the fintech world, who's popping up and what are they doing? And really, I wanted to kind of understand whether fintechs are really, we know they're disruptive, but are they going to displace and disintermediate the traditional system, or are they going to partner with, right? What's kind of the long-term view, right? 10 years from now, what will we look back and say, well, this is what fintech did to the traditional financial services industry? And so that's one of the things that I kind of looked for as I went through that class, as we studied the various, there's payments, there's personal lending, peer-to-peer lending. You kind of look at the path that some of these fintechs have taken as they enter the market, and then as they kind of grow, and all of a sudden, they have to be worried about access to capital, just like a bank does. And regulatory, the regulators are starting to kind of take note as well and say, well, hey, if these entrants into the market, right, are starting to actually participate in this value chain, we need to make sure that they're doing it in a safe and secure way. And so all of a sudden, the regulatory environment is now starting to, kind of impose, as they should, right, impose themselves on that fintech world. So it was all of those kind of things were some of the things I was looking for as I went through that course.
So you feel partnerships will be the end result? Is that where your mind is, or do you see it otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so.
Right.
I think so. But I think it also really depends on the bank, or and if it's not a bank, maybe it's a servicing or a mortgage or whatever, right? But I think it really relies on how that entity responds as well. I think that as traditional financial services entities, we need to be seeking out those opportunities and say, well, what are the fintechs doing, and are there places where we can partner? So I'll give you one example. One of the kind of things that popped up in fintech is this peer-to-peer lending. So if, as a small business owner, traditionally I would go to a bank and say, give me some money so I can start a business. Well, late, after the debt downturn, 2009, 2010 kind of era, we started to have some of these fintechs popping up that said, hey, forget about the bank. Right? Let's find borrowers, and let's find lenders, and let's match them up, and let's just do peer-to-peer lending. And you don't have to, worry about your credit score. We'll kind of do a risk assessment, and we'll kind of figure these things out. And so and that actually took off and started to grow, because at that time, the banks, of course, weren't lending. Well, now we're back to a more traditional environment. And one of the problems that these fintechs run into is they don't always have enough money to lend. They don't have enough potential lenders for the demand for all the borrowers. And so what are they doing? Well, they're either establishing their own bank charter, or they're partnering with a bank.
Yeah.
As a traditional, bank, right? We need to be looking for those opportunities and say, hey, let us come help you with that problem you have with capital, right? Yeah. So it could be either. I hope it's the partnering, right? But I think we all have to participate in that and look for those opportunities. Because if not, they're going to go get their own charter, and they're going to become a bank, and then they are going to displace.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's interesting, right, to see how these have popped up and how much it's changed. And with technology changing so fast, it's almost like blockchain seems like it came out of nowhere. I'm sure people that were following that technology from the get-go were very, oh yeah, this was coming. We knew this was going to happen. And then with Bitcoin, kind of brought it to the forefront for everybody and how this thing works. But even with the regulations, and that's, the volatility of Bitcoin has been around. Is it going to get regulated? Is it going to get banned? Are they going to be able to use it as a real currency? And so you see that volatility. So I imagine that's a big risk, a big challenge for the industry, is like, what's going to happen with all these cryptocurrencies as well? And how's that going to look for the banking world is there much talk just in the industry with the other CIOs or just in general around what's going to happen with crypto and how that's looking, just the landscape of that?
Yeah, I think so. So my personal opinion, I think there's a lot more to be concerned. Well, not concerned about. There's a lot more to think about with regard to blockchain than about cryptocurrency. Right now, and I think you nailed it. Right, it's the volatility. The problem is that cryptocurrency is so volatile right now that it's hard to consider it money. Currency is in the name, right? Cryptocurrency.
Right.
But I mean, there is a formal definition of money. And part of that definition is that it has value, that it holds value. You can price something and that, this is $5 and it's going to cost $5 to buy this thing. And, there's the famous example with Bitcoin where, the guy went out early on, right? The very first person to use Bitcoin to buy something bought 2 pizzas with his Bitcoin. And 4 years later, that same amount of Bitcoin was worth $4 million, right? So $4 million for 2 pizzas, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that volatility, and it doesn't take 4 years anymore, right? You look at the last 6 months.
Yeah.
The value of the cryptocurrencies is changing so quickly. It's hard right now anyway to consider that officially money, right? It's an investment. It's a way of, it's almost bartering, right? But it's hard to look at it and say this is true, real, money today. Now, 5-10 years from now, obviously, I think that's going to be different, but it's not going to happen soon.
Yeah.
Be interesting to see where the value lands. It's very speculative at this point.
Yeah, extremely.
Yeah, but I enjoy the conversation. Huh?
When it changes so fast because Elon Musk tweets, right?
Right. Yeah, they're not going to let him on Saturday Night Live anymore, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
The blockchain, though, and a lot of people don't understand that, but blockchain being an underlying technology, security focused technology that becomes an enabler. So like you said, I think you're right. I think some people, I'm glad we're having this conversation because I believe some people equate the two together and they're completely not, as you already mentioned. And, blockchain becomes the enabler, that new technology that is going to allow things to change, i.e. your example of the mortgage packet, being moved from A to B. So I don't know how many people understand that. There's lots of things, blockchain. You think I've been talking a lot lately about RPA, repetitive process automation, which I think affects, as well, can be a big impact on the banking industry for you, potentially. And I think there's everybody's heard the words and everybody understands a little bit, but doesn't understand enough, just say, oh boy, sounds like something I probably need to get involved in, but I'm not sure how yet. So to that end, blockchain or RPA, I'm sure, that's part of your, it's obviously part of your role to decide when to pull in these technologies and how to do that, right?
Yeah, it is. And we've actually just started leveraging the blockchain at Merrick, and we're doing that from a fraud prevention perspective, which is really exciting. The really intriguing thing about blockchain, in my mind, there's 2 aspects to blockchain that really make it very interesting. The one, of course, is that it's secure. If you look, and again, people equate blockchain with Bitcoin, so we'll talk about Bitcoin, as the initial technology, but Bitcoin itself has been hacked. People have stolen Bitcoin. They've transferred money that they shouldn't have, gained access to money that I guess I shouldn't call it money because I just said it's not, but they gained access to Bitcoins that that weren't theirs. But the blockchain technology itself has never been hacked. The blockchain technology is very secure. And part of the reason for that is because it's not centralized, right? And that's the other aspect to blockchain that's intriguing. It's decentralized.
Yeah.
There's no central authority that is responsible for the blockchain. And so, you take those two things, it's very secure, it's decentralized, and that all of a sudden becomes very intriguing. And of course, it's immutable, right? Once a link is added to the blockchain, that's it. It's there forever. And so that's why it's so intriguing. You have this ledger that is always accurate. It's always there. And again, so far hasn't been hacked. So
That's a big point.
Yeah, it makes an interesting topic towards the security part, and security being such a big, I guess a big rock to consider in banking and in financial services, or anything that has to do with lots of moving money around, about security. And we've talked about how, in banking, they're more advanced as far as putting money towards security protocols and putting money towards security, make sure things don't get hacked and whatnot. And blockchain just seems to be like that next evolution of adding another layer of some sort of security, like you said, like fraud prevention. And it could be many other things as well. What do you see as far as just like the security in banking? And is that changing much, or are people just constantly adding more and more services to try to, thwart any attacks? Or how do you see security playing out in banking right now?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I've worked in a lot of industries, and one of the really nice things about working in the financial services industry is I really don't have to fight too hard for security dollars.
Sure you don't.
It's been a fight, right? Because nobody wants to pay. It's insurance, right? Nobody wants to pay until you've been hacked. And in the financial services industry, obviously the thought process is very, very different. So yeah, security, I mean, security itself, I don't see is really changing. It's security is all about, are you who you say you are? And do you have authority to access what you're trying to access? That's it, right? That's all that security is about. It's those two questions. And those are fundamental, and that part of security is not changing. How we do that, how we go about that, and how we detect when the wrong people are trying to access things that they shouldn't, or when people are not who they say they are, that's changing, that's evolving. But I don't think there's anything different about the banking industry or the financial services industry that does that differently than anyone else.
Yeah, I think the rest of the world is running behind you. First off, X years ago, they didn't care what you cared about was with regard to regulations, compliance, security. They've grown to care. They're way behind you on knowledge and probably still abilities, but I think the world's running to try to catch up with where you are today and with your industry. So I love how you said that, though. Are you who you say you are, and should you have access to what you're trying to get? And it is that fundamental. If only it was that simple. That made it sound very simple, Ken. I like that.
If only it were that simple.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's interesting though, because the nice part is that companies that are outside of banking, if they're looking to increase their security stack or increase like their ability to thwart those attacks, there's at least people that have led the way. I'm sure you'd be a great, peer to talk to, and like having a peer group obviously is always a great thing to have. So people that can look to you and say, well, how did you do? Like, where do you start? What are the building blocks of creating a good, security around the organization?
Yeah, it really does. It comes down to having what I refer to as a security program. You can be secure and not know that you're secure. You can be secure and not really understand how secure you are. So again, the fundamentals extremely, simplistic. it's those two questions, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
all of the activities that go around understanding who's trying to access what are they trying to access, are they authorized? It really comes down to a lot of different questions around, um, you know, uh, uh, identity, right? Identity management. And then there's your response, right? And how do you respond when something alerts you to say, hey, maybe this activity isn't right, and all the logging that goes along with that and the monitoring. And so you have to kind of wrap all of that into a security program
Mhm.
so that you can then easily say, okay, this is what we're doing to determine that we are secure. This is what we're doing in our response. This is what we're doing in our reaction. This is what we're doing in our prevention. This is what we're doing in our security awareness. And you create these pillars, and then you have your program established in each of those pillars, and you can easily,
Yeah.
monitor your progress and very clearly state, here's why we know we're secure, because these are the pillars that we're following and these are the activities we're doing in each of those.
Good.
Yeah.
We wouldn't want you to share, obviously, any of your secret sauce, but I think one of the areas that I've found to be really insightful in the last few years has been some of the intelligence systems that are able to know, say, okay, that's Ken. He's going to log on his computer every morning and he's going to go to MSN at 8 o'clock. And at
Mhm.
8:15, he's going to do this. And these systems that are actually learning the users and learning their mannerisms and that's a new level. That's awesome that those kind of capabilities are coming out. I know, when you look at phishing email, some of the phishing mail has become so good,
Yeah.
so sophisticated, yet only you know that your CEO would never send a note to Johnny and say, go get a gift card for me. You have to understand the people. So I think I will only assume that you're including some of that technology that's coming out without you sharing any of the details. But that's another level to really help, because as we get more sophisticated to protect, as you do, obviously the attackers become more sophisticated at the same time. Scary.
Yeah, you make a great point. I mean, the the old saying in security, right, is that the hackers only have to be right once. We have to be right every time, right? They only have to get through once, and
Yeah.
that's it. And the unfortunate truth is that the weakest link is always going to be people,
Mhm.
because hackers are
Correct.
they're not trying to break into systems anymore. What they're trying to do is get people to give them their passwords. And if they can get your password, then it's much harder for us to say, should that person have access to that, right? Now we have to go to, is that person who they say they are, right?
Yep.
And that's a more difficult question to answer sometimes. So yes, Jeff, I think you bring up a great point. It's that AI that says, how do we know that this person is who they say they are? Well, it's because these are their normal habits. This is what they do. This is how they behave when they come to work. They usually access, their computer from this location, not from this other location. And so you look for those anomalies,
Mhm.
and AI
Mhm.
can pull out those anomalies and raise the awareness, right, to your
Correct.
security people very quickly and say, hey, go take a look at this, because this isn't normal. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's okay. Sometimes the person's on vacation and that's where they're accessing it from and everything's fine.
Correct.
But again, the hackers only have to be right once. We have to be
Well,
right.
and they solved your rule number one, because they're able to say they are who they aren't. So
Right.
that now you have that problem.
That's right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I want to shift gears a second. I know we've about 10 minutes or so left, and we talked a little bit before about big data, data privacy and whatnot. And you have a lot of experience in that, and going for doctorate work in big data. And I thought it was interesting. One of the things you said that most companies only utilize about 5% of their data, and I always kind of equated that to, like, they always say, oh, you only use 10% of your brain, right? But let's just kind of just, I know it's a very broad subject, but I just want to jump in there and just say, like, where do you see like big data being used in banking and just in general as it's changing and people are starting to mine that data and find value from that?
Yeah, that is a fascinating topic to me. And again, I've delved into that quite a bit. But yeah, that's an actual. I mean, the stat is a couple of years old, but it's an actual statistic. 5% companies only use 5% of the information that they have access to, and one example is what we were just talking about. We have all kinds of information about what people do, what our employees do, what do they access, what are their habits, what are their behaviors. And if we're not using that information for the security purposes like we were talking about just a minute ago, then what's the value of having that, right? It's just sitting there waiting for us to use it. The same thing can be said for our customers. We have customer data, we have customer behaviors that when we gather all of this information and store it, it's not doing us any good sitting in a database waiting for someday that we might want to go look for one piece of information. So big data is really starting to kind of come into its own right now with the analytics that are looking through how do our customers behave? What is it that they're doing? What do we see just before they hit the purchase button? Or what do we see even better when they don't hit the purchase button? Yeah. Right? Why we can see their behavior on our website, and then they don't get that loan, or they don't buy this item. So analyzing that information, looking for those behaviors, can then help us to go and recognize that, hey, it's this one little piece of information that we have on our website that's worded incorrectly. If we change the wording, that's scaring people away. Let's change the wording so it's more clear. It's that kind of thing that big data can really help us with, where we can then really start to utilize that information and change how we operate. That's the value of big data, to drive change.
How do you see, because a lot of it's knowing what questions to ask, right? Because you have all this data, and then it's like, well, how do you create your own algorithm to ask that right question to pull out the answers that you want? How do you see that? To me, that would be a challenge. How do you guys solve for that? To make sure you're asking the right questions and learning how to ask the right questions.
Yeah, exactly. That is one of the big challenges. And in my doctoral study, that was one of the things that came out, was that historically, and I hate to talk about the business and IT because we're not separate. So it's one, right? We are part of the business. But in that context, the business people wouldn't know what questions to ask. They would say, hey, we've gathered all this information, but we want to know more about our customers. They would come and ask the business analysts or the DBAs, hey, go and run this query for me, get this information. And they didn't really know what they had access to. And so they just had a specific question. I want to answer this one question because we're thinking about this new product we want to go develop. Mm-hmm. And the data analysts were saying, hey, wait a minute. If you ask this question instead, here's a whole richer information that you can get about something you're not even thinking about. Mm-hmm. So I think, to answer your question, how do we get there? It's that partnership. It's where business people look to the data folks not as the doorway into the data, but partners in, hey, this is where we're trying to go with our business. Here are the goals we're trying to get to. Not we want to build this product. It's here's where we want to go as a company, right? Now, help us to figure out what information we already have that can answer some of these questions. Help us to figure out how to get there. Help us to figure out what product we want to go build, right? Mm-hmm. Where before it was, hey, we're the business guys. We're going to figure out all the direction, everything. We're just going to come ask you these specific questions. Yeah. So get involved sooner and make it a partnership. That, I think, is when we start to really exercise the value that we have in that pile of that lake, right, of information that's available. Yeah. And it's the data guys that know it, right? They know intimately what's in there. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
No, I'm just saying what you just said. I hope people rewind and listen to that 3 times. because it's so powerful. It really is. You think about that IT person that knows all of that data in many organizations has zero idea of what the business person's trying to do, solve, develop, etc. So they are in zero position to help that business person succeed. The business person has no idea that this IT guy is sitting on this mound of information that could make them successful. So you're absolutely right, and that's why people should rewind this. Is that partnership? That fact that IT isn't another department; it's the fabric in the business, and to establish that two-way highway there. Companies that figure that out are successful. Period. And
Yeah.
it's great points you bring up. I think it's I'm glad we got to there on the podcast, because Alex, that's a huge point Ken's making. People should listen to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. We've talked to a lot of people on outside of IT on the podcast that are in customer success, the customer success managers and directors and they're looking at the same thing. How do we use data to increase that experience, make the customer experience better? How do we, where are customers leaving us? Where are they becoming more loyal? And the big piece was always do they even have a data analyst on staff? Because if they're not big enough, it's a big expense to have. And then finding a good data analyst that can go in there and read through it, essentially, right? How to get all that data out of the lake and make something of it. I think that's a big piece. And I think banking is probably a lot further ahead, in that realm on the data side than a lot of industries are.
Yeah, I firmly agree with your 5% estimate. I think you're spot on. I've read those studies, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah, there's a pile of information there that we just don't even know that we have. And one of the companies that I talked to in my study, I talked to the data analysts, and they said, we've got, and this is a fairly good size entity, and they said, we get questions about, hey, can you go gather this information? Can you go get more data? And they said, our answer right now is we don't need more data. We've got we haven't even analyzed the information that we have. Just ask us questions, and help you define the questions, and we can give you the answers, very quickly, because we don't have to go gather anything. It's already here, right? We have it.
Right.
Yeah.
Such good information. I know, some of the other challenges with big data is, are you able to collect it, right? And with the compliance involved, and how there's some good information out there, but there's certain lines you can't cross to get certain data that you want, right?
Yeah. So that gets to my other passion. So we talked about security, right? The two questions in security, which is, are you who you say you are, and should you be accessing, or do you have authority to access what you're trying to access? The other big question is, and this is where information governance comes in. The other big question is, should you be accessing that information?
Mm-hmm.
And should we even have, as an entity, as an organization, should we have this information? We've collected a lot of personal information about our consumers, about our customers. Should we have that? And what should and shouldn't we use that information for? And this was another thing that came out in my study, was that ethical behavior and the responsibility now that is falling on companies from an ethical perspective. They have gathered so much information, but what should we be using that information for? Just because we can mine that, should we be mining it? That's not our data, right? And the sooner, and this, I actually wrote a blog post on this recently about, the sooner we realize as a company that we don't own that information, we are stewards of personal information, then we'll start to get to where we can actually achieve realize the benefit of big data. Because the benefit of big data is that I, as a consumer, can have things that I want marketed to me. A sale on something that I really want to buy pops up and says, hey, Ken, look, this is on sale, go buy it. But if it's not something I want, then I don't want someone mining my information and sending me an ad for something that I don't want to buy. And so, you know, the companies have all this data, but in some cases, you know, should they be mining it? Should they be using it? And that's a whole different question from the security.
Right. That's a good point.
Absolutely.
It's been great, Alex. This is super.
No, we can go down any of these paths a lot further. And I love the topic of big data because it covers so many silos within an organization, not just IT. That's where typically where it's mined and where it's gathered, but there's so many business units that can benefit from it. And smaller companies like, you know, in the mid-market space at maybe 100 employees, 200 employees, there's some great data there that they can get and utilize to grow. But a lot of times it just comes down to resources and not having the resources to be able to mine the data and then ask those right questions. So it's definitely, I think, a challenge for a lot of organizations because you hear about it. Everyone knows the social media platforms have like started the boom, right, of gathering big data and everyone's social behaviors and utilizing that. And I think ethics is a huge piece of it, and the morality behind it. Like, where do we go in society and for humanity, like with all this data that you gather, and like where's that line that delineates between too much versus not enough? So yeah, but Ken, right. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I think we're gonna have to definitely have you on again. This has been a blast, and thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a whole lot of fun. I can't. It's surprising to me that 40 minutes or so has passed already.
It's amazing how fast it goes. Yeah,
it goes quick. Yeah, especially on topics that are we're all passionate about and we all like to talk about. So it's great, and there's so many avenues to go down. And Jeff, good having you on again. Of course, helping me co-pilot this, and really appreciate you guys taking the time and jumping on.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Have a good one. Well, that wraps up the show for today. Thanks for joining, and don't forget to join us next week as we bring another guest in to talk about the trends around cloud contact center and customer experience. Also, you can find us at adleradvisors.com, LinkedIn, or your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next week on another Cloud Podcast.